Hi, how are you doing, Alicia from Mexico?
Spain's doing a great job.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Good afternoon. Our moderator, María Elena Agüero, is stuck somewhere in traffic. So we'll do as women always do. We'll improvise, and we'll improvise well. And when she arrives, we will welcome her. So I am taking the responsibility to lead the panel until she arrives. First of all, thanks to the Instituto Cervantes for allowing us the opportunity to be here. It's always nice to be at the Cervantes and to be hosted in a place that has such a history and such a meaning for the Spanish-speaking people. So thanks to the Instituto, thanks to the audience, and thanks to the panelists. We have with us today a great group of panelists. I will go through that in a moment, but I want to emphasize what they represent. We have 3 representatives from 3 governments that have been, for the past few years, absolutely supportive and behind the theme that we are going to discuss today, which is the theme of Madam Secretary General. This is Slovenia to my right, Spain to my left, and Mexico to the next left. So they are representing their governments, but I have to say their governments have been unconditional behind this notion. And I just wish we had a little bit more of these 3 throughout the membership. And then we have Melanne Verveer, who is...
I do not represent my government.
if it wasn't clear, that's what... No, Melanne I will talk about each one of them in a second, but I just wanted to emphasize that what we are going to discuss today is essentially a political decision. It's a political process. It's a political positioning. So where governments position themselves is absolutely central, and that's why I wanted to start emphasizing the presence of the 3 member states that sit with us today. Thank you again. You know, GWL Voices is an organization that was founded 7 years ago. I cannot believe it. On Sunday, March the 8th, we celebrated our 7th anniversary. It was co-founded by Helen Clark, Irina Bokova, and myself. And I'm sure you know this, the 3 of us competed to be Secretary General 10 years ago. Oh my goodness, I shouldn't say that. 10 years ago, and of course we lost. We lost because even though it was 70 years of the United Nations, and it was the 1 for 7 billion campaign, and of course it was going to be a woman, and of course this could not be delayed, in the end, member states, the P5, the Security Council, choose yet another man, our good friend Antonio Guterres. So after that, a couple of years after that, and after recovering from our frustration, and let me say this, I was very frustrated, but I wasn't so frustrated because I didn't get it. I was frustrated because there were 7 women there, and not a single one of us was up to the task. So that sent a strange vibe that what is happening here. So we met again somewhere in New York in one of these venues, in one of these events, and we had dinner, and we decided that it was high time that we come together and do something. And that's when we decided to launch GWL Voices, Global Women Leader Voices, to work on 2 things. María Elena? I have already explained, so don't worry. I have already explained. And we decided to launch GWL Voices to work on the reform, the strengthening of the system, but to do that through one particular lens, which is the lens of women and women leadership. So that's what brings us here, and since we are improvising, now I'm going to pass the floor to the moderator. Do you want me to moderate, or well, how do you want to do this?
Go ahead.
I moderate, and you become a discussant here. both María, Elena and Melanne are members of GWL Voices, so we have a broad representation around the table. We, as you know, I'm sure, we have, every year we issue a report that is called Women in Multilateralism. We have issued the 5th report this year. And of course, this year we have focused on what is critical, which is the process of selection of the Secretary General. And we make the case for a woman to be Secretary General. And we make the case not because it's right, not because of justice, which, by the way, it is a case of justice. We make the case because we believe there is a different way of leadership that women bring to the table, and having that different way of leadership is what is needed today in the space we have and in the ways things are happening in our world at large and in the global governance in particular. So this is why we are here. This is to discuss why is it that we need a woman and how do we get there. Again, we have Darja Bavdaž Kuret to my right. She is the ambassador at large for women, peace and security, very, very important title, not only for women, peace and security from the Ministry of Foreign and European Affairs of Slovenia. And I have to say, the president of Slovenia is a huge, huge supporter of this issue. Then we have Alicia Buenrostro, who is the Deputy Permanent Representative of Mexico to the United Nations. We have Ana Jiménez, who is the Deputy Permanent Representative of Spain to the United Nations. We have Melanne Verveer, who is a member of GWL Voices, but she's also a strong, very strong on women, peace and security because she leads that institute within Georgetown University. And then we have our former moderator, now a discussant, María Elena Agüero. María Elena plays a very important role. She is the Secretary General of the Club de Madrid, whom I'm sure you're aware is a very important group of former presidents and prime ministers that have led in their countries in a democratic environment. The space is shrinking, but we have a good group of people there to work on these matters. So I will start with the first question. Let me get this right. And I will go to you, María Elena. What evidence, what does the evidence say coming from the Women in Multilateralism report about the systemic gaps that we have in the system? What are the key elements? You can read the report. We are not going to go through details, but just the main messages in the report. You have the mic there.
Thank you, Susana, and sincere apologies for being late. But I think many of us were at the Global Women Leaders Voices dialogue this year and heard the results of the very important and interesting report on multilateralism, women in multilateralism. And in terms of the barriers, the systemic barriers, I'd refer to two levels of those barriers. On the one hand, let's call them the objective barriers that exist within a system a governance system, a governing system that is, if we go to the multilateral level, it's the member states that are responsible, let's say, for that multilateral system. And it's the member states that at their national level and at the national level where we find many of those systemic barriers from the start. In much of the discussions that we've had here this week, we've heard about systemic barriers that have to do with the way that political parties are structured, the way that political parties select and choose the leaders. That is a systemic barrier right there. in terms of how women can access power, can access decision-making positions, can enter that decision-making space, first at the national level, and from then there, well, maybe first at the local level, but there too the political parties are important. So I would say not only from what we read in the report and what we heard in January in Madrid, but also what we've heard these days here, this as a systemic barrier. Also, there's perhaps a more subjective element, and that is the way that we as women engage in the system, and how at times there are elements that are objective but also very subjective in terms of fear or insecurity, and that too is in a way systemic, but it's more personal and it's more subjective. But if we look at the multilateral system and at the numbers and what the report told us, we also see that there are, in spite of the progress that perhaps we can say and we can see that has been made, there are still those gaps, tremendous gaps, and the systemic barriers are the major reason for those gaps. And the systemic barriers have to do with the organization of our governing systems, our governance systems, above all.
Thanks, Maria Elena. Interesting. By the way, the QR here is the QR to the report. So if you want to capture it, there it is. You know, in this report, not only we look into the institutions of the system, in fact, 64 institutions we measure, we also look into member states. And it's very interesting. 72 member states never appointed a single PR to the General Assembly. 72. And some of those are very progressive, supportive countries, but they never appointed a PR. And I don't have the exact number, but 60-something only appointed once. You know, once and done. Only the rest appointed more than once a woman. So that goes to the systemic aspect that Maria Elena was referring to, you know? I mean, when member states don't see this as an essential part of their decision process, it's hard to really have good, full representation. And what is also interesting in the report is that we measure the participation of women in governing bodies in Geneva, in Vienna, and in New York. And the one where the representation is lowest is New York, 23%. Why so? Well, this is where the real issues are discussed. So less women than 35% in Geneva, for example. Still low, but 12 points less in New York for the nature of the subjects that are taking place in their discussions in New York. So let me go to you, Anna. What are the practical reforms that you think that will help to ensure an increased participation of women in leadership positions, in decision-making positions? What do you suggest, what do you propose will be practical things to do?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Susana. Mil gracias. So it's a pleasure to be part of these conversations and to work very closely with you. The energy that you bring to the room is fantastic. So really very energizing, I think, for us member states as well to be in these conversations and to be in this CSW week. I have a big delegation from Madrid, government, civil society, parliamentarians, and it means a lot, I think, as a diplomat to be part of different conversations, to listen to everyone in the room, from countries from all over the world. So I just wanted to start with this introduction because I think it's important for us as diplomats sometimes also sort of to get out of the bubble of our negotiations, our conversations here in New York, and really to see how the world, you know, responds to this issue. The energy that is out there is also very inspiring, and it helps a lot in these times, which are obviously very challenging. And also, as I'm not dodging to your question, I'm just trying to add some introductory elements. And I was listening to the statistics that you offered, and I'm afraid that things don't seem to be getting better here, because I think Alicia would agree that every time we say goodbye to one of our colleagues at the DPR level for sure, and I'm afraid at the PR level as well, female colleagues, they are always replaced by a man. So yeah, it seems the community is also getting a bit smaller. It can be something anecdotal and maybe will change in some years, but unfortunately we also see a trend here. And in our own case, for instance, here in New York, we've never had a peer, female peer, and very few women in my position actually, despite the fact that I'm very proud to be part of this very feminist government. So now just turning to your question, I think the first practical measure is to ensure that young women join us in this endeavor, both at the national level through our diplomatic services, and I think at least in the case of Spain, it has been a huge dramatic change. For instance, when I passed the exam, there was only like 5 of us. It was also like a very small batch of people because it was a year of a lot of financial restrictions. But these, I mean, I would say like in the last 10, 15 years, the numbers have increased exponentially. I think that's very important. We really need the younger generation to join international relations, the system that we have, that is the only system that we have. And that, for me, is key. And if we go to the UN side, I think that the UN 80 reform, which is, of course, very important and very needed, we also have to be careful that all the reduction in staff doesn't translate only in not hiring new talent, new people. So far, we've seen that these entry positions have been heavily affected, whereas at the sort of the highest levels of USGs and ASGs, most the positions have been preserved. So there's something that some member states have highlighted. We have received reassurances from the UN leadership that this is not the trend, and that they will make sure that there's still, you know, young people and young women joining the UN. But I think that's essential, because that's one very practical measure to ensure that we always have people defending these principles and ideas. But my second point is the importance of associations, of alliances, of getting together. And it's interesting because I've been to many conversations also during this week, and that's an idea that reemerges all the time. It's been mentioned by many different constituencies, like we need to find a way to get together, to yourselves, you know, are examples, what you've done with the pool of amazing women that you have, you know, senior women with experience fighting for these causes. For instance, at the national level, we also created an association of women women diplomats, and it's active. It has a mentoring program. So how we can also, you know, women with some experience and something maybe to share, how we can be also helpful for our younger colleagues who face different and similar issues than the one that we faced ourselves. But I think the fact that we are not alone, and particularly when you are a diplomat and you are like dispersed all over the world, and you just change your post every X years, I think to have like these alliances and these groups that you can go back to is very important for leadership, for decision, for sort of also training people for that and to share experiences. And my last point is also, I think it's very important to invest time in digital technologies, in really doing a lot of continuous training for leadership, because sometimes, you know, you are so immersed in what you're doing in your everyday life. But these days, I think it's very important for us women in diplomacy to be able to use all those tools in a way that can be useful for our work, but we can be proficient in this different language that is out there and it's going to change our world, including our profession, and it's also going to shape the leadership of tomorrow. So I will leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anna. You mentioned coalitions. You know, this is something that is coming back and again beyond our perspective regarding the women issue, is how we relaunch a stronger multilateral system, and maybe the only way in these days is to bring coalitions together around issues, you know, and that's the way to move forward. Darja, let me go to you now, and how do you feel that both governments, member states, and institutions can move from words to actions? How can we really start making things happen? You know, women like for things to happen.
Thank you, Susana. Thank you for a kind invitation, and thank you for your leadership and the whole Global Voices leadership in multilateral sphere and in diplomacy. Let me start from my own country. We are members of United Nations since 1992, and in this time we have managed to have 2 women permanent representative. One, 2006, and then later on I came. So it's a good score for this short time. But let me say, in my ministry, right now, we have 62% of diplomats are women. Leading positions, it's gender parity, even a little bit in favor of women. Middle management position is gender parity. When it comes to the positions in the heads of missions, ambassadors and consul generals, right now we have about less than 40%, 38%. But we managed to come to the point that as of September, the new rotation, it can happen that we are going to have gender parity. We have right now decisions that is going to reflect 30-30. We have 62 missions, and 2 appointments are yet to be decided. But how did we come to that? About 15 years ago, we set up the system of equal opportunities in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, also in the government. We are trying to pursue the equal opportunities really throughout our service. Still, we have some embassies that were never represented by a woman, like our mission to NATO, our embassy to Washington, D.C., I think Turkey, and Denmark. But because Denmark is usually a very comfortable country for older male colleagues who want to have fun and you know, to live in a comfortable country. On all multilateral posts and all difficult posts, we had women. Multilateral, Geneva twice, Vienna twice, Strasbourg twice, permanent rep in Brussels also once. So we had really good score on that, which means that we created, yeah, we want that, but also we created a generation of senior diplomats. They understand what is about multilateralism, what is the force or the power of multilateral system. So this is very good. Then we reflected, this situation reflected also in our candidacies in the different international bodies. Right now, we have a woman judge of ICC, International Criminal Court, and we have a woman judge in the European Court of Human Rights. This is, of course, very important, that we have also those that are bringing the justice to the table. Of course, we have also women commissioner that is dealing with the enlargement, which is one of the most difficult issues right now in the European Union. Then, luckily, our political atmosphere allowed us to elect the first woman president a couple of years ago, Dr. Natasha Pirc-Musar, and she's a great supporter of Global Voices, but basically of women's power in the multilateral system, and she's very vocal from the stage of General Assembly to the different, to your last dialogue in Madrid, everywhere. She does not miss the opportunity to speak in favor of women leading the United Nations. But what I would like to say is also that through this, I think that we have created a good space for our positions in the multilateral system. But when it comes to the multilateral system, I was here in New York when we were 51 permanent reps, women. Now it's down to 30-something. These informal networks are very important because we used to have at least once a year or twice the separate meeting with Secretary General and the President of General Assembly. So this was a powerful messaging tool to the leadership of United Nations. Then about the whole system of United Nations, the equitable representation or parity has to become a state of mind, but this cannot become without a huge support of member states and our own support, because this is just not going to happen. And one of the issues that I want to stress is that when we are speaking about powerful places in the multilateral arena, rarely the powerful places are occupied by women. Security issues, listen, also in UN, security issues, rarely here and there. So I think that we have to change the narrative that we are good for the SDGs and soft issues. No, we are the peacemakers. We are one that can deliver on this. And this is something that I think when we are going to change this narrative, we are going to create a space to take more powerful places. And then, of course, as Madeleine Albright said a long time ago, we have to support each other. There is a special place in hell for those women that do not support women. Thank you.
Thank you, Darja. And you mentioned Madeleine. I was thinking about Madeleine when you spoke about the 51 women that were at the UN when you were here. When Madeleine became a perm rep for the United States, there were 8. And she always told this story. She was a member of GWL. In fact, she is an emerita member of GWL Voices. She told the story that she gave the private line, at that time there was no mobile, the private line that was direct access to her, to all these women. And she said to them, if you call me, I will respond immediately. I will be there for you. And it was big countries, small countries, I mean. And all of a sudden, the male PRs were absolutely upset with the access that their women peers had to Madeleine Albright that they didn't have because they had to go through the secretary, through the assistant. And they raised it, and she said, well, that's easy to solve. Your government puts a woman in your place, and that will be addressed. And she always told this story because it's true. Creating those networks, those coalitions is fundamental. Alicia, let me go to you. Is the UN ready to place a woman at the helm? Is finally ready to match action with rhetoric?
Very easy question, of course. I would like to make, thank you very much, Susana, and it's a pleasure to be here with you tonight. I will try to be very blunt. I think that...
You are very blunt.
Yes.
So you don't have to try.
Okay. I think that if you look at the world just right now, I think that it has become more difficult, more entangled, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of, well, you have the wars, you see men and egos, all around, which make things look more complex, difficult, and so on. That's one thing, and that's the environment that we are seeing, and that's a reality. On the other hand, just look at how much we have achieved. The fact that we are here and talking about alliances and coalitions and networks mean that we women never stop, because that's the truth. We never stop. We keep on going. So if you look at the number of women at the IAEA, the decision-making process in high-level positions, you will look at them and you will find them. If you look at more women coming from STEM in different agencies, you will find them. You will see that the membership, were very much involved and very active in a resolution of the General Assembly on revitalization of the way in which it works and how we can have a more transparent and balanced system in order to get a Secretary General and to favor a woman. At the General Assembly, we have been fighting over and over again to see more women presidents of the General Assembly and so on. If you look at the language, if you look at the Women, Peace and Security within the Security Council, the resolutions that we have got, there are many of them, and we can be proud of them in many ways. That there is still a way to go, that's for sure. It would, it's very long. But if you look at how much we have achieved, I think it's also something to consider as well. This means that we have been successful. Now, the question as to if we are ready for a Secretary General at this point, I always tend to say when I am at a meeting in a conference or giving an intervention or whatever, that women in leadership need to lead the way with the energy, with the feminist energy, coming really from the bottom of your heart, of your nerves, of your brain, stomach, and whatever. And that makes us different from men. We have been saying that women, that peace and sustainability can be sustained in time better than more time because of our characteristics. And it's because we are different from men. So I think that it's time to have a Secretary General, a woman Secretary General, of course, always there will be, Now, my question is whether the times that we are living through will enable that woman to be able to excel in what a woman does much better than men, which is being able to negotiate and get to a world in which we live in peace and in a secure world and so on. I am not sure whether exactly the times where we're going through, because circumstances have changed completely. If you have asked me this question 1 year ago, I couldn't say what I'm saying. But I have seen the difficulties. For example, the conclusions in this CSW, there are times in which we should try to preserve what we have already achieved in terms of language. We're not going to expose it. So if one member state has changed completely its position, and it doesn't enable us to work properly. And it's a real problem for us. Many times you need to think about the tactics. If you know that there's going to be a vote, for example, then I would take a risk of being more ambitious in the language, and because I know I have the numbers, I will risk myself. Otherwise, if I do not, there's time also to think about what is best, and probably the most feasible or the best thing to do is to maintain and not risk the language that we have already achieved through so many years, so many efforts from so many people, and women working all together. So my question is this one. There would be some other people that would say, no, it's precisely at this time when we should be disruptive. And it could also be, no? But when I look at the images of the men who are running the world at this very point, you tell me exactly whether we will be able to go through in this major achievement that we want to get. So I wouldn't like to see a woman and being battled, in the middle of her period, for example. No, I would prefer to have many undersecretary generals being women and preparing for the next stage. So I don't know exactly whether this could be the time really to try to be disruptive and say no, because we are strong and because nothing stops us, we should continue striving and we are going to get there. I don't think that it's only a matter of getting there. It's a matter of how is she going to develop and how is she going to handle that becoming the first Secretary General as a woman and being able to do what we have been preconizing all the time, which is she has the characteristics that the man does not, and she's able to negotiate, she has wisdom to move into the political strategies and triangules or whatever it is. So the circumstances that have evolved and that have got to the point where we are right now, it's something that make me think. And I would love to see a woman, for sure. I think that it's a thing of justice. I just don't know. The only thing is I wouldn't like to see someone as a woman and then not being able to deliver accordingly. I might be wrong, and as I said, somebody might say, no, it's exactly the time to go with everything and strive with everything. That will depend also on the candidates that we have in the end, and we will have to think strategically and tactically. So, for example, for me, it's very important what Ana has said. We really need, through UNAT, we need the most talented people in this organization, that it's, falling in many ways. It's not really complying what it's supposed to do, or starting with the Security Council. There are many other things that we have done and that we have achieved in many other fields. But we need, for example, young, talented women. We don't see them. We need the talented ones. We don't want people, or even women, just looking for a 35-year period, in an organization, just thinking about the perks that she will have during this period. It's about the people that we need in this organization to be able to excel vis-a-vis the challenges that we are facing. So in this regard, I would say that if we have a woman that we think that because of her characteristics, personality, experience, and talents in many ways, we believe she is able, I think that we should go with everything with her. But I also believe that the times that we are going through make it more difficult for a woman to excel. I might be wrong, as I said, but I think that the circumstances have changed in many ways, and that I think that it might be, at some point, if I am asked, better to have many undersecretaries preparing themselves, to become a secretary general. But one thing is for sure: we women, we never stop. We keep on working, and we go on over and over and over again until we get there. Thank you.
Thanks, Alicia. You said something that many people are talking about, and that is referred to as the crystal cliff. You know, that women often are appointed at the highest level in a company, for example, when the company is failing and is... So yes, it's true, we are at a point where things are very complicated, and maybe, if some say, okay, let's give a woman an opportunity just to prove that she fails. I also like to say that it's not that appointing a woman brings a magic wand to solve all problems. We need to be careful not to think about Wonder Women here. We are human beings. But it is very critical that when a woman comes to the top, she surrounds herself with a very strong team. Absolutely. And I find women being always more prepared to work in teams, which in my view is badly needed these days. Melanne, let me go to you. Is your view that multilateralism performs or underperforms when women are not sufficiently involved, particularly in the area where you work so much, which is peace and security? Is that something that you believe is very, very true?
Well, first of all, let me thank you, Susana, for bringing us together and for everything GWL Voices does. I also want to say I disagree with you because at the outset, you were talking about all the female candidates for SG the last time around, and you said, I guess we weren't up to the task. I think you were up to the task, but the system proved to be a bigger barrier in being overcome so that your talents could all be released. And I want to also reinforce for the audience how important that GWL multilateral report is, the 2026 one. It has just an amazing collection of data in terms of women's representation and all the critical UN posts. And it also is designed in a way so that you can see 80 years, for example, of presidents of the General Assembly and only, five females. So you see all these male faces and then just a couple here and there. And it's stunning when you're presented evidence in that way. And one point about Madeleine Albright, who I miss terribly, she called think of the representation of female diplomats at the time, those few, 8 of them, but she said we were the G8 and we were proud of it. And really maximized what that representation meant in terms of bringing others on board. And I do think that that's important, what's been said about the support that the sisterhood needs for each other. But I do think the institution underperforms because it has not tapped the talents, the perspectives, the experiences of half the world. And think about it. What does the UN, this incredible institution that was formed after World War II so that we would not experience another world cataclysm like that, it represents men and women. It represents all of us contributing to peace and security, and yet the reality is something else. And this is an evidence-based case today, that diversity results in stronger performance, it results in greater creativity, greater innovation, collegiality, consensus. The Harvard Business School has articles putting out what a difference it makes when a company, for example, has a more diverse leadership component to it. And yet, remember COVID those few years ago? What were the stories, the big stories that came out of COVID? Women's leadership. So few women, heads of state or heads of government, and yet they performed extraordinarily. The infections were down. The way they talked to their populations with empathy, with honesty, with a harsh dose of reality, but they brought their governments around in doing the right thing and prevented the worst from happening at a time when terrible things were happening. And so the world was taking notice all of a sudden. Oh my God, look at what these women have done. And you sat back and you said, well, what did you expect? But it was contrary to the narrative that's out there, that women, heads of state or heads of institutions, don't just cut it the way it needs to be done. And I think we have a lot to learn from what other sectors do. I mentioned the business community. And it's always been very instructive for me to see what the World Economic Forum does. It's rarely known, but they put out an annual gender gap report. And nobody expects, these barons of business and, the top men in the world ruling the world. Why does this institution put out a gender gap report where they look at the gap between men and women on certain metrics, and one of those metrics is political representation? And that is the lowest success rate is in that category. Economic participation is higher, not exactly where it needs to be. Education, healthcare, much, much better. But political representation, not where it is and where it needs to be. And when asked why, they say because where this gap is closest to being closed on the equality between men and women, and nowhere is it fully closed, those countries are far more prosperous, far more at peace, etc. There is reason for diversity. There is reason to promote this agenda. And it is for greater performance, not for underperformance. Because the reality is, where there is underperformance, you don't have what you need to have at the helm. And I think, I see this in my own government, not today, but in not that many years ago, where consistently issues that would have never gotten on the table were put on the table by women members crossing the divide. This is often what women do. They come together as women and put issues that are vital. So, for example, our domestic violence law passed because of that reason, brought it then to the attention of the majority men, really went after it, developed coalitions behind it. But, we were sort of just coming off the Olympics. And when you look at women Olympians in the United States, they come back with all the gold hanging around their neck. Well, that wouldn't have been the case without women legislators on both sides saying enough of lack of equality in higher education. Women didn't have a chance to compete on funding the way men did. So you couldn't have competitive teams of women on anything because the resources weren't there. All of a sudden, the legislation, the new laws mandated in public institutions, you had to have this diversity in sports. You had to have equality in access. And what a difference it made. But it came out of women's leadership. And it's just one of so many examples of the difference when we can bring all of us with those talents and experiences into the fore, because decisions affect all of us. The decisions these institutions make are affecting all of us. And they're affecting women, which is half the population, and we don't have a say in it. And I think for the United Nations, which look at that charter, look what it's to represent in terms of human rights, in terms of equality, to not have in its leadership the degree of representation that it should have as a symbol to the world, if nothing else. But certainly it would make it far more effective in my view, and I think we all share that. So yes, in all of these fields, we're going to underperform if we don't factor in the value of diversity.
Thank you, Melanne. You are totally right, and you refer to the Charter. I always like to remind ourselves that the Charter of the United Nations, written in 1945, says that men and women are equal. Now, when people talk about these questions being modern questions that have been brought to the fore by these wild people that think different, it's not true. In the basic principles of the Charter, not only all countries are equal and all of them have one vote, which was a principle of the democratic foundation of the United Nations, it said women and men and women are equal. So when we refer to the peoples, we don't refer to the men of the world, we refer to the men and women of the world. And so it's a basic principle that is 80 years old. And so it's about time to get it, to move from principle to implementation. Listen, I had a round of second question, but I think it will be better, given the rainy day, you know, this hour of the day, that if we start to get some questions from the audience. So I'm going to take a few seconds so you start to think a question. So when I ask, you are ready to react. It will be important to hear from you, and we have some young people here. Not that only young people can ask, but I will encourage young people to do it, and so that we can react to the things that you have in your mind after listening to this first round. Who would like to? Yes, please. The gentleman there. Yeah, we hear you. We hear you. Yeah. I can say, and I know this will sound disrespectful, I love you. This is a very Latino way to recognize your question. Who will want to address the question? Because you're spot on. This is overwhelmingly a female. Who will want to address the question? Yeah.
I agree absolutely with you, and I thank you. Because I do think that we can't get where we need to get for all of us, not just for women's progress, but for what that progress represents, without our male allies, without our male colleagues, without our male champions, if you will. And we've, UN Women over the years had men and women, male, yeah, he for she, and it's much deeper. And I wrote a book some years ago called Fast Forward, because I believe we have to accelerate our progress. It's moving too slowly, and we know it's going to take 100+ years for equality. But in that book, I have a lot of male champions, and they're mostly men at the corporate level who had promoted their staff, realized how critical women in the marketplace as their employees, in the supply chains, in their leadership, what it represents for the company's progress. And have initiated some extraordinary programs to support women's economic advancement globally at huge amounts of money and at huge commitments to their supply chains and to training. This is an enlightened approach, and they get it. It's not charity. It's not philanthropy. It is strategic. It is smart. They know it's effective. And for a businessman, it reflects the bottom line. It shows up in the bottom line. why are we so backward in so many ways, not realizing in our public institutions how important this leadership is? So thank you for the question.
Thank you very much, and thanks as well for the very good question. And it's also a recurrent theme in many of the discussions I've been part to in this week and other conversations also. Civil society organizations, everyone is saying exactly we should talk more to the men and have them as part of the conversation. I think one of the challenges that everyone also mentions, not only in European countries but others as well, is the issue of younger men and the influence of social media and all the digital world and the algorithms. Someone said at some point that it takes like 25 minutes for the algorithms to recognize that it's a young man who is connected, and then the whole propaganda against women and all the extremist ideologies start bombarding this person. So I think there's a lot of work that we have to do as governments, as private sector, as societies as a whole about what we are doing here with younger men in particular. So I think that's also part of this new world also we are facing. And in terms of the multilateral seeing, I think goes back also to the point that Susana was making at the beginning. I mean, it's kind of a vicious circle in a way that if we don't have more women diplomats and more women part of the conversation, then the spaces get reduced. And I think we have negotiated many documents, and I think we as women also like bring different perspective. In general, I think here in the UN we find a very good environment among male colleagues and the recognition that we are equals. I've never been part to anything in which I have felt that because I was a woman I was treated differently. But I think it's how you sort of scale up the conversation, how you take it to the different level. It needs much more political investment. And at the end of the day, it's a conversation about power. And we also need to be honest about that conversation and have the conversation in our own countries, among countries, to see the kind of world we want to build.
Yeah, thank you for your question. Let me put it this way. We are here to advocate for women empowerment and for women to have a possibility to get the most important jobs in this world, also the most difficult one. So this is the point. But I would completely agree, and we do that. Of course, this is just the week of CSW. Otherwise, we would have gender parity in the panel, because majority of countries, also my country, I know, we tend to have, whenever we have discussion about anything that matters, we want to have a gender balanced panel. So this is the point this is the approach, gender balance, whatever we are talking about. But today we have the privilege to call for action for Secretary General. Thank you.
But you're right. We run the risk of preaching to the converters. So that's something that we need to be very careful. Another question? Yes, here.
Okay. Hi, I'm Niyati. I'm from India, and I'm doing my master's in international affairs in New York right now. And I'm graduating soon, and I was hoping to get into the journalism space or news media, and I can't do that back home because there's no freedom of speech, and speaking against the government is very, you're risking your life, essentially. And then I came here, and it's sort of, I think in real time, you're seeing all of these corporations similar to India and these big, powerful men buying out the news and sort of suppressing narratives, sanitizing things, silencing things. And narratives are really important, in general, but also furthering causes like this. And I was wondering if you could just speak to the importance of preserving journalistic freedom and allowing for platforms where civil society can express itself.
Well, let me say something here. We are all for rights and freedom, and that applies to journalists, no question, but also applies to the doctors that are fighting in the field. It applies to the women who are trying to survive day in and day out in the middle of all these conflicts. So that's the principle that is enshrined in the way we work and the way we see the world. Let's recognize that this is a moment where these principles, the principles of democracy, the principles of international law, international humanitarian law, respect for human rights, respect for freedom of speech, are not necessarily prevailing throughout the world. And that, I think, is part of the question that we need to ask ourselves. Why is it that there is this movement backwards? I hate backlash. I just hate that word. We use it so much these days. This backward movement that takes us from a world that was based on these principles to one where having leaders that simplify the answers to the very complicated questions that the world faces and puts them in tweet size or X size, and they get the people to rally behind them and empower them to restrain the rights. Why is this happening? It's a deep, deep problem that we are facing, and that's part of the issue we have with the multilateral system, because if the peoples, if the citizens are not valuing enough these basic principles, if they are distancing themselves from institutions and principles, how can they value global governance, the multilateral system? So this is a very concerning question, and it will give us a long time for a conversation, but I see María Elena wanting to chip in, so María Elena, over to you.
No, I think that there's, and I'm glad that you've spoken and you've brought this to the table or to the panel, because this is all about also education. It is, and I go back to what you were saying as well, and what we have been referring to in terms of women and girls or masculinities or young men. For a long time, I felt that we've concentrated and focused on, for example, education of women and girls. Well, sorry, we've got to also focus on education of boys and men. And in terms of the freedom of expression, we find a phenomenon which is, it has everything to do with algorithms, it has everything to do with social media, it has everything to do with AI and the digital transformation that we are all experiencing and we are all learning in many ways, but which is also bringing us backwards. That which we thought was going to give us greater freedom of expression, is actually taking us backwards, sideways. I don't know where it's taking us, but it is important. I'm not saying that we don't need it. On the contrary, I think we do need it. We just need to better understand it in order to better use it, because it is beginning, I think, to govern us rather than us governing it. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's something that we have to pay a lot of attention to.
I just wanted to say, I hope you pursue your goals in journalism, because freedom of the press is absolutely vital. And I think the pushback against women today is so connected to what these authoritarians are doing all over the world in keeping women out of public office because they don't want power shared. They know that it's going to curtail them in some way. And they're all clamping down. In the United States, as you alluded to, there's a huge clampdown on keeping certain journalists out of the White House or out of the Pentagon. We don't want your coverage. Social media taking over more and more and constricting that space where you had, experts who would come in and be able to tell the public in their journals or on television what was happening. And now you've got this diffusion. Everybody has an opinion and nobody knows what to believe based on what. So this is part of a terrible trend. And I think we are seeing, in terms of human rights violations today, so many violations in the media sector against journalists because journalists are a threat to authoritarians.
Thank you very much. I would like to go a little bit more into the organization itself because here we also want to see about to see how women can get better positions into the multilateral work. So one of the things that has been said here, we've been talking about freedom of the press, or human rights and so on. The thing is that we need to strengthen the system of the United Nations that was built around 3 pillars and which created a more solid international world order based on rules and norms. So the 3 pillars are peace and security, development, and human rights. They are absolutely interconnected among themselves. And those rules are being challenged by many leaders outside right now in the world. It has happened. The history of men and women goes in cycles. It's not only like a direct line going upwards all the time. And we are at a time when all these values are being challenged. And within this system is where we have been protecting and advancing the agenda for women within the United Nations. So those 3 pillars, which are constituted by values and norms and rules, are the ones that protect women in many ways. And many countries, the majority of countries here, what we are seeing is that countries that are playing outside the system and using the power, just for the sake of it in terms of, hegemonies and so on. And it has always happened. But the system of the United Nations allowed, at least to think that working together and through cooperation and through these 3 pillars, we would be able to get rid of wars and conflicts. The 20th century and the beginning of this century, we had certain, of course, we had the Cold War and we had conflicts. But if you look at it, it has been the most prosperous and economically the most the one in which the world has expected the wealth and the richness we have never seen before, and commodities or, having a comfortable life and so on, even though we still had the problem of inequality and so on. But it has been like that. And now it's been challenged, this system. And this system is the one, it's based on international law, and it protects the smallest countries. The idea is to have a system where Vanuatu and Kiribati would have a seat on the table, and that their rights and their votes were as important as the one of the United States or Germany. So what we are seeing right now is countries getting out of the system, challenging the system, and so on. And that's where we're seeing, all these challenges to the agenda of women within the United Nations. So the most important thing is to keep on being together and working together. If you see, talking about the Secretary General, for example, the thing is look again also at the structure of the UN and the Security Council. It's the Security Council who proposed the next Secretary General candidate to the General Assembly. What do we want? We want the General Assembly to have more power in that regard, no? But we have not been able to do so because unless we work on changing the way in which the Security Council was created and the power that it gives through the veto to the 5 permanent members, it's the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, the ones that once and again will select the next Secretary General. And knowing how they think, how Russia thinks about women, how China thinks, and how the United States think. So where do we need to work as well? I think that we have to be tactically working in terms of how to change where is the power that does not enable us to be able to move forward in having, a great Secretary General, a woman Secretary General. But we are facing also with this issue about the power inside one of the main organs of the United Nations. And as long as we are not able to move so here we need to make important changes as well. Thank you.
May I have a different opinion? We don't want a super girl to be Secretary General. You know, all Secretary Generals, they were not perfect guys.
Far from it.
So what we want, it's not the right time. Well, wait, let us wait and go and cook or whatever, bake cupcakes. The point is, it's not about that it's not the right time. It's P5, of course. I was ambassador to Russia. If Putin has the most powerful woman as a governor of the national bank, I don't know why he would not agree for that. You know, so it's not putting in question whether it's the right time. It's that we used to have to use tactics. No, we had 7 candidates. Now we have only 2 candidates. The point is that we need more candidates. And of course, the P5 are going to decide. We know that. We know the procedures. We know the different kind of. But it's still the advocacy that there is a time for a woman Secretary General is needed. You know, it's not just up to them. Advocacy in these days is very important. I will tell you one example. There is it's related to the activism of non-governmental organizations and civil society. One small organization of civil society in Slovenia started last year European campaign, My Voice, My Choice. They collected more than 1 million signatures. They went to the My Voice, My Choice. It was to access to free, safe abortion. That is not allowed in all the, accessible in all the European countries. In my country is. They went to the European Parliament with more than 1 million signatures. The European Parliament adopted the resolution, and the European Commission supported that resolution, which means that because the healthcare is still a prerogative of member states in the European Union, but women, for example, in the country where there is no accessibility to free and safe abortion, could use the European Social Fund money for that. So this is how advocacy wins. This is how the power of women, if they decide to do something, wins. And I believe that at certain stage we are going to have a woman Secretary General, because it's normal. But do not self-restrict us, ourselves. No, it's always the right time for the right candidate. And as you wrote in your article, that it's not about succession, it's about relevance. So thank you.
Let me. We are pretty much getting to the end of our conversation. I will not even try to wrap up. Do you want to say something?
I
Yeah,
wanted
please.
to ask you a question that maybe you could say to the audience what actually happens in the Security Council with Secretary General, because it's very opaque. You can go in with all the announced candidates and come out with somebody else as Secretary General.
Well, it is opaque. There is no procedure, no clear procedure. And, you know, in 2016, where, again, there were 13 candidates, 7 women in total, there was a huge positive energy because of the engagement of civil society, because people having conversations, having dialogue, having debates. You know, Al Jazeera showing this all over the world. So it gave a sense of accessibility, of possibility, of transparency. Then one day, they closed the door, and that was it. And it was the same old way. And the security, this is very interesting. We talk about power shift in the world. We haven't spoken about this today, but there is a huge power shift in the world. And this organization does not reflect that power shift. And the best example of lack of reflection of the power shift is the P5 within the Security Council. Guess what? The only thing where they will always agree is that there is no need to reform the Security Council. And this is China, Russia, and the US right there, The UK and France, who are more realistic, are more flexible. But the hardcore is China, Russia, and the US. And these are the ones who, in the end, define who is going to be the Secretary General. My own experience is, I was the second candidate after Antonio Guterres in 2016. And I had the most votes after him, and I would have gone into another straw polling, except for the fact that one member of the Security Council, one P5, vetoed me. And when finally I learned who the country was, and I'm not going to mention it, they said, nothing personal, it's geopolitical. So there is always a reason. And interestingly enough, some of them have told me later, well, maybe we didn't get it right. So it's clearly a very, very opaque process. And I think we need to live with the process. We are not going to change the process now. That's what it is. But the one thing we are doing as GWL Voices is, first, we are speaking with all member states. We are speaking with the P5, of course. We know who they are and how they are, but we still reach out to them. We speak what is called the E10, the non-permanent members, and we tell the non-permanent members they are powerful because the P5 cannot do this on their own. They need at least 9 votes. So they need votes from the non-permanent members. So they should make sure that their vote counts and is value. But there is another element, which is the General Assembly. It's not said anywhere that the General Assembly should approve by acclamation what comes from the Security Council. And the General Assembly, although this is not a wholeheartedly embraced principle, many countries many member states in the General Assembly have said that it should be a woman, have said women should be encouraged. So if the Security Council comes later in the year, comes September, October, bring a candidate, now a proposal that is a man, the General Assembly could go and say, take this back, try again. So there is power in the hands of member states. And this, I think, is a time for the power to be exercised. Will they do it? I don't know, but that's something that we are advocating for. Just exercise that power. Don't be frightened, because this is a very important moment, a moment in which the institution is under scrutiny, is under criticism, there is a lack of trust in the institution. And again, I'm not saying that having a woman as Secretary General will, as part of a miracle, a magic wand, change everything overnight. But I can tell you that having a woman at the helm of the United Nations will create a buzz, will create a reaction, will create a notion of something different happened. It will create an expectation on the young women of the world, on the girls of the world. It will create interest from the news. It will have the UN being talked about under a different limelight. And that in itself is almost a miracle, because you don't hear much about the UN and everything you hear is criticism. So maybe having a woman there is the first thing to open an opportunity for the UN to get into a new dynamics. Listen, I think I know there were hands raised. I'm sorry we cannot entertain all of them. I thank the panel. Again, it's great to have you colleagues here. I thank you for being here, and I thank again Instituto Cervantes por darnos esta oportunidad. Thank you all.